The city of Red Hollow stood on broken stone, old bridges, and half-buried towers where the wind always sounded tired. High above its cracked streets, a colossal arena rose like a black crown, built from metal ribs, old empire walls, and a living floor that seemed to breathe under torchlight. People came here from every district because the arena did not just decide winners and losers. It decided status, food, housing, safety, and whether a family would stay free or sink into the arena underclass forever. Kael knew that better than anyone because his younger sister Lily had already been marked for next season if he failed now. Kael was a lean young man with short black hair, sharp eyes, and hands worn by hard labor, and he was driven by one simple promise: he would never let Lily be taken from their home and forced into the lower cages beneath the arena. Lily was a brave teenage girl with long brown hair, quick thinking, and a quiet way of hiding fear, and she mattered because she was the last soft thing left in Kael's life. Their enemy was not only the fighters in the ring. It was the system itself and the men who fed on it, especially Damien Vale, the arena master, a cold man with slick gray hair, fine black robes, and a smile that never reached his eyes. Damien claimed the tournament was justice, but he really wanted a ruler who could control the city's hidden power buried under the arena floor, and he needed fighters like Kael to awaken it. When the loud brass gates opened, Kael stepped inside with one thought in his chest: survive long enough to keep Lily safe. But the first thing he saw was the ranking wall, a living tower of glowing names that shifted after every match, rewriting every fighter place in society as if they were words on paper. The crowd cheered when the names moved because they knew one rise could mean a better life and one fall could mean shackles. Kael entered at the lowest line, and he understood at once that the arena was not a game. It was a machine that ate people and sorted their lives by force. Kael's first opponent was not a giant or a beast, but a fast young brawler from North Gate named Owen, a stocky man with shaved blonde hair, bruised knuckles, and the desperate look of someone who needed a rank boost to feed his family. That made him dangerous in a different way because he fought like a man with nothing left to lose. The bell rang, the floor pulsed under their feet, and the living arena shifted its panels to make the space narrow and sharp. Owen rushed first, throwing heavy strikes that cracked the air, while Kael stayed light and watched the rhythm of his shoulders. Kael did not win by being stronger, he won by being calm. He waited, slipped a swing, and used Owen's own momentum to drive him against a rising wall plate that stunned him long enough for Kael to pin his blade to the floor. The crowd roared, and the ranking wall flashed. Kael climbed one level, but the price was immediate. His district badge changed color, and a messenger in a silver mask warned him that every next victory would raise the value of Lily's name in the system. That was the hidden cruelty. The better Kael did, the more the arena noticed his family. In a private chamber beneath the stands, Damien smiled at a glass screen and told his guards that Kael was learning fast. He wanted Kael alive because strong fighters fed the ritual better than weak ones. That night, Lily met Kael near the service stair, and she saw the blood on his sleeve and the fear he tried to hide. She did not beg him to stop. She told him to keep going because she understood that if he quit, she would be taken sooner. That was the first time Kael realized she was not only someone to protect, she was also his reason to keep his own heart from breaking. The next match pulled Kael into the Ash District bracket, where the air smelled of smoke, rust, and old furnace soot. There he met Mara, a blade dancer with long red hair, pale skin, and a narrow black combat coat lined with ash-gray fabric. She was a woman with a calm face and dangerous grace, and she fought for one reason that made her easy to understand. Her district had been crushed by arena taxes, and if she could rise high enough, she believed she could buy back homes taken from her people. Mara moved like a spinning blade in a firestorm, and the living floor answered her steps by lifting and dropping metal plates to support her speed. She struck from strange angles, and every slash forced Kael to back away. He could see that she was not cruel, only committed, which made her harder to hate. She saw the same in him, and for one moment their fight became a test of pain and will rather than hatred. Kael noticed that the arena reacted to each clean hit with a pulse of light under the stone, as if it fed on impact and memory. That was his first clue that the place was alive in more than one way. Mara drove him toward the edge, and Kael nearly lost the match when she cut through his guard and sent his weapon skidding away. Then he did something she did not expect. He stepped toward her instead of retreating, trusting the smallest opening, and used the timing of her own blade spin to catch her arm and break her balance without harming her. The crowd gasped because it was the kind of move that looked simple only after it was done. Mara fell to one knee, then laughed once, short and tired, before she accepted the loss. She warned Kael as she stood up that the upper rounds were not about talent anymore. They were about permission. Only the chosen fighters reached the final chamber, and the tournament master always wanted a symbol, not just a winner. Her warning stayed with Kael as his rank rose again, because now he saw the truth in the walls around him. Every update in the ranking system did not merely reward strength. It changed how guards spoke, how vendors bowed, and how the city itself decided who mattered. Kael was no longer invisible. He was becoming valuable, and that was far more dangerous. By the time Kael reached the next bracket, the crowd had started chanting his name, and that frightened him more than the fights. His opponent was Victor, the bone-forged champion, a tall man with white hair, a scarred jaw, and armor made of smooth, pale plates that looked like polished bone. Victor did not carry fear in his eyes. He carried certainty, as if every blow against him was only another tool waiting to be used. He fought for Damien, or so everyone thought, because the champion always protected the arena order and crushed any rising threat. Victor opened with a heavy slam that shattered one of the floor panels and sent a wave of force through Kael's legs. Then the true horror of his style became clear. Every impact Victor received, whether blocked or struck, traveled through his armor and returned as a harder shock wave. His body turned force into a weapon. Kael struck him once, and the return blast almost knocked him flat. Kael understood then that simple strength would fail. He had to read the rhythm of the arena itself. He watched the floor, the walls, the light pulses, and the way Victor braced before each return strike. Kael let Victor believe he was winning, then lured him into a section where the living floor sank and rose in a slow pattern. When Victor released one of his strongest counter-blasts, Kael used the timing of the moving plate to send the force sideways into the arena wall, cracking it open. Behind the broken stone, Kael saw something no fighter should have seen, a chamber of dark roots, glowing channels, and chained light running under the arena like veins. He also saw people in masks feeding energy into the system, not from magic alone, but from fear, rank, and obedience. Victor saw his reaction and hesitated, and that hesitation cost him the match. Kael drove him back not with raw force, but with the truth of the hidden chamber burning in his mind. Victor surrendered in silence, and the ranking wall shook as Kael climbed again. But the bigger shock came when Victor spoke after the fight. He said he was not Damien's true servant. He was a guard of the old Empire line, sent to protect the hidden power until the right ruler appeared. He also said Damien was not trying to win a tournament. He was trying to complete a ritual started by the fallen Empire, one that would bond the city hidden power to whoever survived the final bracket. Kael now understood the trap. The arena was not selecting the strongest fighter for honor. It was selecting a vessel for control. That truth changed everything, because Kael no longer fought only for Lily. He fought for the whole city. In the quiet between matches, he met Lily beneath the supply arches and told her the truth in simple words. Damien wanted a ruler who could command the buried power under Red Hollow, and if he succeeded, the city would tighten into a cage for everyone below him. Lily went pale, but she did not break. Instead, she told Kael that she had been watching the ranking wall too, and she had noticed something strange. Every time a fighter climbed, the lower districts lost access to water and heat for a while, as if the arena was drawing power from the city itself. That was the final piece. The tournament was feeding on the people while pretending to reward them. Kael also learned that one of the silver-masked messengers had been carrying orders from Damien to target Lily if Kael tried to withdraw. So Kael made a choice that changed him inside. He stopped thinking like a lone fighter and started thinking like someone responsible for everyone trapped under the same system. When the final gate opened, he did not step in as a boy trying to protect a sister. He stepped in as a man who understood the cost of silence. Damien waited at the center stage, dressed in black with gray hair slicked back, his calm face showing real excitement for the first time. He admitted the truth without shame. The city was weak, the Empire ruins still held buried power, and only one ruler could shape order from the chaos. He said the arena would choose that ruler, and he had built the tournament to make the city obey. The living ranking wall rose behind him like a giant spine of light, and the floor under Kael began to pulse as the final ritual awakened. Kael looked at Lily in the stands, saw her fear turn into trust, and understood that his greatest strength was never the blade in his hand. It was the promise he had kept match after match, not to become the kind of man Damien wanted. Then Kael stepped forward as the whole arena leaned toward the final act, and the hidden power beneath Red Hollow began to answer him back. The air inside Red Hollow felt heavy, hot, and strange, as if the whole arena had swallowed a storm and was holding it in place. Above the floor, the towering wall of light rose behind Kael like a spine made of living stone and glowing metal, and every name on it shifted with a low hum that made the crowd go quiet. Below his boots, the arena floor pulsed in steady waves, and each beat seemed to call from deep underground, where the hidden chamber waited beneath roots, chains, and old magic. Kael stood in the center with short black hair, sharp gray eyes, and worn dark leather armor that had seen too many hard fights. He was young, lean, and tired, but he was still standing. Lily watched from the stands with long brown hair falling around her worried face, and she held her hands tight because her brother was somewhere below the arena and she could feel the danger closing in. Damien Vale stood high on the platform in his elegant black robes with slick gray hair, a cold smile, and pale eyes that never blinked with kindness. He wanted one thing more than anything else, and that was control. He believed the city only stayed alive when people knew their place, and the living ranking wall was his tool for teaching that lesson forever. Owen, with shaved blonde hair and bruised knuckles, waited near the broken edge of the fighting ring, still proud even while exhausted. Mara, a woman with long red hair and calm eyes, moved like a dancer ready to strike. Victor, tall and broad with white hair and pale bone armor, watched everything with hard discipline. They had all been pulled here by the same truth, even if they did not yet say it out loud. If Damien finished the ritual, Red Hollow would not just crown a champion, it would trap the city under a system that turned fear into law. Kael felt the pulse under his feet grow stronger, and the sound inside the wall changed from a hum into a deep, hungry tone. The names on the living ranking wall blurred, then reshaped into fresh lines of light, and for a moment it looked less like a list and more like a judgment. Damien lifted one hand, calm as ever, and spoke to the whole arena in a voice that carried through the chamber. He said the city had always been ruled by strength, and that his ritual would simply make the truth visible. He said people were safer when they knew their rank, safer when they accepted the weight of someone above them, and safer when they stopped lying to themselves about freedom. Kael understood then why Damien was so dangerous. Damien did not think of himself as a monster. He thought of himself as a caretaker with a cold mind. He had watched the city tear itself apart through fear, hunger, and pride, and instead of healing it with trust, he had chosen to build a cage and call it order. That was why the hidden chamber mattered so much. It was not just a secret room. It was the source of the arena power, a place where energy channels, chained light, and root-like veins fed the wall and the ritual together. Whoever controlled that chamber could rewrite the rules of the city. Victor stepped forward first, his jaw tight and his posture straight, because he knew structure and discipline, but even he could see the wrongness of this design. Mara moved next, quiet and sharp, her eyes scanning for masked attendants hiding in the shadows below the platform. Owen clenched his bruised hands and muttered that he had fought hard his whole life, but he had never asked to be a number on some glowing wall. Lily leaned over the railing and shouted Kael's name, and her voice cut through the noise like a rope thrown to a drowning man. Kael looked up at her, and in that one instant he remembered every time he had chosen patience over rage, every time he had held back when anger would have been easier, and every time he had refused to become a cruel winner just because the crowd wanted one. Then the floor gave a hard shock and the hidden chamber answered back. A crack of light opened in the center of the arena, and from below came a rush of cold air mixed with the smell of wet stone and old dust. The masked attendants who had waited beneath the platform in plain silence began to move in careful steps, each one wearing a dark mask with no expression and carrying long rods that fed the ritual lines. They were not random servants. They were the keepers of Damien's system, trained to protect the chamber and keep the city afraid of what lived below. Kael saw that they were not guarding power for treasure or pride. They were guarding it because Damien had promised them a world where the strong never had to worry about chaos again. That promise had tempted them, and that was enough to make them dangerous. The first clash came fast. Victor lunged to block a wave of light that swept across the floor, his bone armor flashing under the glow as he forced it back with sheer strength. Mara slipped between two masked attendants, her movements so quick that the eye could barely follow her, and she knocked both rods aside before they could complete a binding line. Owen rushed in with raw determination, taking hit after hit against his shoulders and arms, but he kept moving because too many people had treated him like trash for too long, and he was done being pushed down. Kael joined them not with wild force but with timing, cutting through the gaps in the ritual pattern and striking only when the light lines opened. He was no longer fighting just to win a match. He was fighting to break a machine that turned people into rank and fear. Damien watched all of it with a thin smile because he wanted Kael to struggle. He wanted the crowd to see the cost of resistance. He wanted Lily to see that hope could be crushed if she trusted the wrong person. But Damien made one mistake. He expected Kael to fight like a man driven by pride, yet Kael fought like a man driven by a promise. The hidden chamber pulsed again, and this time the roots along the floor lit up in bright veins, spreading from the crack in the center toward the wall itself. For one breath, the whole arena shuddered. The living ranking wall trembled, and the names on it flashed like they were trying to escape their own lines. Kael felt something inside him answer that tremor, not as magic he owned, but as power that recognized honesty. He understood the simple truth in that moment. The chamber did not feed on obedience alone. It fed on the belief that people could never change. Damien had built his whole rule on that lie. He had told himself that fear was the only force strong enough to hold the city together, and he had used the arena to prove it over and over. But Kael had become proof of something else. A person could be worn down, trapped, and tested, and still choose not to turn cruel. That choice had weight, and the hidden chamber felt it. Lily saw the light rise around Kael, and her fear changed again, this time into steady resolve. She did not fully understand the power beneath Red Hollow, but she understood Kael, and that was enough. She turned toward the nearest guard rail and shouted for the people in the stands to keep watching, because if they looked away, Damien would win by silence. Her voice spread through the crowd, and more faces began to lift. One by one, the people who had cheered for ranks started to see the fear behind the system. Damien's calm finally cracked, but only for a moment, and what came through it was not rage. It was disappointment. He told Kael that he had offered him a place beside order, a place beside real power, and that Kael had chosen chaos instead. Then he revealed the deeper truth behind the final ritual. The wall was not only ranking fighters. It was storing their fear, their surrender, and their shame, and sending that energy down into the hidden chamber to keep the city obedient. Every match had fed the system, every cheer had helped it grow. Every time someone bowed to the wall, the ritual had grown stronger. That revelation hit like a blade made of ice because it meant the whole city had been helping Damien without knowing it. Kael felt anger rise, but he did not let it rule him. Instead, he looked at Owen, Mara, and Victor, and he saw that they had reached the same answer in different ways. Owen had fought to survive, Mara had fought to stay free, and Victor had fought to protect a code that Damien had twisted. None of them wanted the same life as before, so Kael did the one thing Damien did not expect. He stopped trying to beat the ritual with force, and instead he stepped into its center and spoke to the chamber with a clear voice, refusing the rank, refusing the fear, and refusing the lie. The pulse under the floor changed at once. The hidden chamber flared bright, the living wall stuttered, and the masked attendants froze as if the rules had slipped from their hands. Damien stared in sharp disbelief, because for the first time in years, someone had answered his system with no obedience at all. The arena did not fall apart. It reacted. Light surged across the floor in twisting paths, then split into safe channels that lifted away from the crowd instead of crashing down on them. The wall of ranks remained standing, but its glow dimmed, and the names began to rearrange without Damien's command. People gasped as they saw that the system could change. That was the second truth, and it was even larger than the first. If the wall could rewrite status, then it could also be broken, and if it could be broken, then Damien had never truly owned the city at all. He had only scared it into obedience. Victor drove back one last wave of force from the chamber door and planted his feet like a shield. Mara pulled two trapped attendants free before the light threads could bind them again. Owen, breathing hard and almost shaking from effort, stood beside Kael with a look that was equal parts pride and exhaustion. Lily pressed both hands to her chest and watched Kael with tears in her eyes, not because she feared him now, but because she finally believed he could hold the line. Damien stepped backward for the first time, his polished control thin and brittle, and the sight of that mattered more than any injury could have. He had not been broken, not yet, but he had been seen. Kael did not chase him. He did not need to. The fight was no longer only about one man or one arena. It was about the truth now waking under Red Hollow, and the truth had just begun to rise. Above them, the living ranking wall shone in broken lines. Below them, the hidden chamber still pulsed with restless power, and far from finished, the city waited to see who would claim the next choice. Kael stood in the center of that storm, breathing hard, changed but not complete, and he knew the real battle was only entering its next phase. Red Hollow sat deep under the city like a second world, and its stone halls glowed with tired red light that never fully warmed anything. The air always felt heavy there, as if the walls remembered every shout, every warning, and every lie ever spoken in the arena above. Around the great central ring, the living ranking wall still shimmered with broken names and shifting marks, while far below, the hidden chamber kept pulsing like a wounded heart that refused to stop beating. Everyone in Red Hollow knew the system was cruel, but most people still followed it, because the wall decided who got food, shelter, and safety, and fear kept the rest silent. Kael stood in that silence now, breathing hard, with short black hair damp against his forehead and sharp gray eyes fixed on the glowing lines ahead. He was not a chosen hero, only a young fighter in worn dark leather, gray wraps, and a simple belt for his blade, but he had already touched the truth, and that made him dangerous. Beside him, Lily clutched the edge of her small cloak with both hands, her long brown hair falling over worried eyes that never stopped searching for her missing brother. She was brave in the quiet way that scared people often are, because she kept moving even while fear pressed on her chest. A few steps away stood Mara, a lean woman with long red hair, pale skin, and a black combat coat with ash-gray lining, watching the chamber with calm focus as if danger was only another rhythm to learn. Owen, a stocky young man with shaved blonde hair, bruised knuckles, and Northgate gear worn thin by hard days, stayed near the wall with a desperate pride that would not let him look weak, even now. Victor was there too, tall and broad in pale bone-forged armor, his white hair and scarred jaw giving him the look of a man built for control, and his stern eyes said he was already judging every choice in the room. All of them had different reasons for being there, but the same problem now bound them together. If Damien Vale kept control of the hidden chamber, then the living ranking wall would never be a scoreboard again, but a cage that locked the whole city into his rule forever. Above them, the chamber ceiling split with thin lines of light, and then Damien Vale appeared on the raised platform that overlooked the arena floor. He looked calm, polished, and completely sure of himself, with slick gray hair, pale skin, a thin confident smile, and elegant black robes edged in silver that made him look like a judge who had already decided the verdict. Damien did not raise his voice at first because he did not need to. He only placed one hand on the railing and let the room quiet itself around him, as if the whole city still belonged to him by right. He explained in a voice smooth as glass that the rankings were never meant to be fair, and that the wall was built to keep Red Hollow stable by rewarding obedience and punishing unrest. That was his real motive, and now it was plain to everyone. He did not care about honor or order in any real way. He cared about control because the hidden chamber powered the wall and the wall powered the city, and anyone who controlled the chamber could rewrite who rose, who fell, and who disappeared into the lower levels of life without anyone else being able to stop it. Lily froze when she heard that because she suddenly understood that her brother had not simply been lost in the system. He had likely been taken because he had seen something inside the rankings that Damien wanted hidden. Kael felt the truth sharpen inside him like a blade. He had already suspected the wall was alive, but now he understood that its broken lines were not random glitches. They were signs of a machine or a spell or both, struggling against a force that had begun to wake beneath the city. Mara stepped forward then and told Damien that his story sounded neat only because it was built from fear. Her voice stayed calm, but the tension in her shoulders showed she had hated his kind of power for a long time. Owen cursed under his breath and said the North Gate had been crushed for years by rules no one could question, and he was done pretending that survival under chains was the same as living free. Victor said little, yet when he spoke, the room listened. He said Damien had forgotten one simple truth, which was that any system built on hidden pain eventually made its own enemy. Damien smiled at that because he had expected resistance, and he seemed almost pleased that it had arrived in such useful form. Then he lifted one hand, and the ranking wall behind him flashed with new names, new levels, and a warning line that spread across the chamber like a crack in ice. Every name in the room shifted for a moment, and that was when the city's power revealed a cruel rule. Anyone marked by the wall could be elevated, broken, or erased from public standing by the chamber below, and Damien had used that power for years to keep rivals weak and afraid. Kael felt anger rise, but he also felt something else beneath it, a strange pull from the chamber below, as if the hidden power recognized him. That feeling mattered because it meant the truth was not only awakening around him. It was reacting to him, and Damien saw that change. The first clash came fast and cold. Damien gave a small nod, and masked attendants poured from the side passages beneath the arena floor, their steps orderly, their faces hidden, and their hands carrying chain lights that snapped and hummed like trapped sparks. They did not attack to kill. They attacked to seize, to bind, and to drag Kael and the others away from the chamber before the truth could spread. Mara moved first, her body leaning low as she slipped between two attendants and struck their wrists with clean, precise blows that sent their chain lights spinning across the floor. Owen rushed in next, using his stocky frame like a shield as he drove one attacker backward and slammed another into a support pillar, his bruised hands shaking from effort but never slowing. Lily stayed close to Kael, though fear made her eyes shine, because she had finally realized that the battle for her brother and the battle for the city were the same battle now. Kael drew his blade only halfway, using timing instead of force, stepping into openings and cutting through chains, cuffs, and control lines with sharp, exact movement. Victor joined the fight with terrifying calm, his pale armor catching the red light as he shattered a line of masked attendants and forced the rest to retreat without taking one wasted step. Yet through all of it, Damien never looked worried. He watched the fight like a man reading a test he had already prepared. Then came the twist that changed everything. As the chamber lights surged, Lily noticed the central wall behind Damien, and she saw a name hidden under layers of old rank marks. It was the name of her brother, written not as a prisoner but as an attendant of the hidden chamber. She stared in shock because that meant her brother had not only been taken. He had been chosen, trained, and placed inside the system long before she ever began searching. Damien noticed her face, and his smile deepened. He admitted almost kindly that her brother had learned too much and had become useful, because people who understood the chamber could be turned into tools or threats, depending on what the ruler needed. Lily looked ready to collapse under that truth, but Kael stepped in front of her and told her to hold on because the system had already lied to her once, and she would not let it decide her future now. That moment changed her. Fear did not leave her, but it no longer owned her. She wiped her face, raised her head, and stood beside Kael instead of behind. The hidden chamber then answered the violence with a deep pulse that shook dust from the ceiling and sent glowing lines racing across the floor. Dark roots pushed through cracks in the stone, not as plants, but as living channels carrying the chamber power upward into the arena. The masked attendants faltered because even they had not expected the chamber to wake so quickly. Kael looked down into the opening at the center of the floor, where chain light twisted around a lower ring of ancient machinery and carved stone. He understood then that the chamber was not just powering the rankings. It was feeding on conflict, sorting pain into power, and feeding that power back into the wall so Damien could rule from above. That was why the fights never ended. That was why every match mattered. The city had been trapped in a system that turned struggle into obedience. Damien had built his empire by teaching people to compete for scraps while he kept the source of everything hidden below. Victor finally turned toward Damien and asked one direct question, asking whether Damien had ever planned to share the city once the chamber fully awakened. Damien did not answer with words. He answered by activating the wall again. The names across the living ranking wall rearranged, and several citizens watching from the upper balconies were suddenly marked for removal from public status, their ranks falling as though the floor had opened beneath them. Panic spread in the stands far above, and the city began to understand that the system itself was under threat. That was when Kael realized the real danger was bigger than one ruler. If the chamber woke without control, it could consume the whole ranking structure and throw Red Hollow into chaos. If Damien won, he would chain that power forever. If Kael and the others won, they might break the city free, but they might also unleash something none of them fully understood. Mara saw the same danger and made the hard choice first. She told Kael they could not simply destroy the chamber because the city depended on it now, and breaking it blindly would hurt thousands of people who had no say in any of this. Owen agreed, though he hated the truth of it, because survival had taught him that burning the wrong bridge could leave everyone stranded. Even Victor, who had looked like a wall himself, gave a slow nod as if he respected a plan that valued people over pride. So Kael took one step closer to the chamber opening, feeling its strange pull answer his own pulse, and he understood that this was not the end of the fight. It was the first real choice. Damien watched him with narrowed eyes, already preparing the next move because he now knew Kael could reach the chamber power in a way no other fighter could. Lily stood at Kael's side, no longer only a girl looking for her brother but a witness to the truth and a person who had chosen to stay. Below them, the hidden chamber kept beating like a second heart, and above them, the living ranking wall flickered with broken light as Red Hollow held its breath, waiting to see whether the next step would save the city or break it open forever. Kael raised his blade not to finish the story but to survive the next one, and the darkness below began to answer. Red Hollow stayed silent for one long breath, and that silence felt heavier than stone. The arena city lay under a roof of dark rock with glowing lines running through the floor like veins in a living body. Above the hidden chamber, the living ranking wall still shimmered in broken pieces, flashing names, numbers, and ranks that no longer looked stable. Kael stood at the edge of the chamber opening, his short black hair wet with sweat, his gray eyes fixed on the dark pulse below. Beside him stood Lily, a teenage girl with long brown hair, bright worried eyes, and a small cloak pulled tight around her shoulders. She had come here looking for her brother, but now she was something more important than a frightened searcher. She was a witness, and she had chosen to stay. Damien Vale watched them from higher ground with his slick gray hair, cold eyes, and thin calm smile, dressed in black robes with silver trim. He ruled through order, fear, and the secret power beneath the city because if the truth ever spread, his careful control would collapse. That was the real danger now. If the chamber opened fully, Red Hollow would not only face chaos but also the end of the false ranks that kept people in their place. The chamber under Red Hollow kept breathing like a living thing, and its glow made the stone walls seem wet and cold. Deep roots pressed through broken slabs, bright channels of light ran through the floor, and the masked attendants moved in silent lines with their chain lights held low. Above them all, the city still believed the arena was only a place of sport and rank, but the truth now hung open in the dark. Kael stood near the center of the widening chamber, his short black hair damp with sweat, his sharp gray eyes fixed ahead, and his lean body tense inside worn arena leather. He understood the danger now in full, because if Damien Vale kept control, Red Hollow would remain a city built on lies. Lily stood close beside him, her long brown hair tied back under a small cloak, her bright worried eyes never leaving the chamber doors, because her brother was somewhere ahead in the dark and she refused to leave him behind. Owen stayed on Kael's other side, his shaved blonde hair shining under the light, his stocky frame wounded by long struggle, and his rough hands clenched around bruised knuckles that had carried him through too many fights. Mara moved like a shadow in a black combat coat, her long red hair loose and sharp against the glow, her calm face showing no fear even as her body stayed ready for a fast strike. Victor stood a little apart, tall and still, his white hair bright against pale bone-forged armor, his scarred jaw tight as he watched every movement with hard control. Each of them had a reason to keep going, and each of them now knew that this chamber was not just a secret place, but the engine of the false order that ruled the city. Damien Vale watched from a ledge above, his slick gray hair perfect, his cold eyes calm, and his thin smile full of confidence, because he believed order was stronger than truth and fear was stronger than hope. He had built his power by keeping people divided into ranks, and he needed the chamber hidden because the moment the city learned what fed the ranking wall, his rule would begin to. The first masked attendants stepped forward when the chamber lights flared, and their smooth faces gave nothing away as they lifted their chain lights. The glowing links snapped through the air in clean straight arcs, not to kill, but to bind, pull, and control anyone who came too close to the center. Kael moved first because timing was his gift, and he ducked beneath one chain light before striking the side of the weapon with his blade handle. The impact sent the line of light skidding away, and he drove in with a sharp shoulder check that forced the attendant back against a root-covered pillar. Lily gasped, but she did not freeze because fear had already followed her this far, and now she knew fear would not save her brother. She grabbed a fallen metal rod from the floor and held it like a shield, her hands shaking once before she locked them steady. Owen rushed to protect her, using his body as a wall as two attendants tried to surround them with linked light. He took a hard blow across the arm, grunted, then slammed one fist into the chamber floor and broke the attendant's line of movement just long enough for Mara to slip in. Mara turned with dancer-like speed, her red hair whipping through the light, and she swept one chain light aside with her forearm guard before striking the attendant wrist and sending the control weapon dropping into the glow. Victor did not rush because he did not need speed when he had power and patience. He met two attendants head-on, caught one chain light with his armored forearm, and shoved forward until both masked figures were driven back into the wall of roots. His voice stayed low and calm as he warned them not to stand in the way of the truth. The chamber shook again, and in that movement Kael saw something important. The energy channels in the floor were not random, and the roots were not only roots. They were feeding the wall above, carrying power upward into the city, into every match, every rank, and every lie. The ranking system was not simply enforced by men like Damien. It was powered by this hidden place, and if the chamber changed, the entire city would change. Damien smiled when he saw Kael understand, because he had wanted that moment. He lifted one hand, and the lights in the chamber turned sharper, brighter, and more violent, as if the room itself had answered his command. Then he gave the truth in the clearest way yet, and his voice carried down from the ledge like a cold blade. Years ago, the city had been torn apart by open fighting between the rich and the poor, and the old leaders had nearly destroyed Red Hollow with their greed. Damien had found the hidden chamber under the arena during that chaos, and the chamber had shown him a way to force order through power, fear, and false rank. He had not created the system to bring peace. He had created it because a city in fear could be steered, while a city in truth could not be controlled at all. That was why the living ranking wall mattered so much to him. It did not only display names. It rewrote hope into submission and made every citizen accept the place he had assigned them. Kael felt anger rise in him, but now that anger had shape. This was not just a cruel man protecting his position. This was a ruler who had decided that people should be kept small so they would remain easy to guide. Lily, hearing the story, finally understood why her brother had vanished into this fight. He had not only been dragged into a dangerous place, he had been dragged into the center of the lie that had broken the city. She looked at Kael, then at Victor, then at the glowing roots under their feet, and she realized that if they failed here, everyone in Red Hollow would keep living inside Damien Vale's lie. That fear sharpened into courage, and she stepped forward beside Kael instead of behind. The chamber doors opened wider with a heavy groan, and the full heart of the hidden room came into view. In the middle of the space stood a tall dark pillar wrapped in light chains, and around it the roots pulsed like veins under skin. The masked attendants retreated into a line, as if waiting for one final command. Damien wanted Kael to reach the center, because he believed the chamber would crush anyone who tried to take control without understanding it. He was partly right. When Kael moved toward the pillar, the floor flashed and bright lines shot upward to form a cage of light around him. The pressure hit fast, and for one tense second even Kael could not move. Mara shouted for him to stay low, while Owen and Victor held the attendants back at the edges of the chamber. Lily saw a narrow gap in the light cage, and she remembered every map she had studied, every corridor she had crossed, and every story she had heard about the arena below the arena. She realized the chamber was built like a lock. It was not only powered by the roots. It responded to the voices and choices of the people inside. The city had been trained to obey the wall above, but the chamber itself listened to pressure, balance, and intent. Lily shouted to Kael to stop fighting the cage and start reading it, because the energy moved where people expected it to move. Kael trusted her instantly. He lowered his blade, shifted his weight, and let the light pass over his shoulder instead of against it. The cage loosened at once. Damien's calm smile cracked for the first time, because he had expected brute force and received understanding. That was the hidden weakness of his rule. He knew how to punish obedience, but he did not know how to handle people who learned together. Kael reached the pillar, placed his hand against the cold, chained surface, and felt the chamber respond like a living heart. A wave of memory flashed through him, showing the first builders of Red Hollow, desperate and afraid, trying to seal away a force they could not control. They had never meant for the chamber to become a throne. Damien had twisted it in. The final clash came in a storm of light, sound, and motion, but even then the struggle stayed clear and human. Damien sent the remaining attendants forward, not because he cared about them, but because he needed one last wall between himself and the truth. Victor broke that wall with brutal patience, one step at a time, forcing the attendants back without cruelty, only strength. Mara cut through the side lanes of the fight and closed the space around Damien, while Owen held Lily behind him until she pushed forward on her own and helped Kael align the chamber marks. Together, they turned the energy channels toward the pillar, and the hidden room began to change. The roots pulled back, the chains of light spread open, and a deep tone rolled through the chamber floor and up into the city above. Somewhere far above, the living ranking wall must have felt the shift because its control would not stay stable for long. Damien knew it too, and his expression hardened into something close to panic. He tried one last command, ordering the masked attendants to seal the chamber and drive the others away, but the chamber no longer answered only to him. The truth had entered the room, and the room had begun to wake up. The attendants faltered, their chain lights losing shape as the power of the chamber turned uneven. Damien was forced back several steps, his robe snapping in the wind of rising energy, and for the first time he looked less like a ruler and more like a man losing the only weapon he trusted. Kael stepped forward from the glow, no longer just a fighter chasing survival, but a leader carrying the weight of other people's lives. He told Damien that the city had been ruled by fear long enough, and that the ranks had no right to chain human worth to a wall. Damien answered with a thin, bitter smile, and he said that without control, Red Hollow would tear itself apart. Kael did not deny the danger. He simply said that truth was still worth the risk. Then the chamber erupted in a burst of white light that pushed everyone back, and when the glow began to fall, one new path had opened deeper below the floor, while Damien Vale stared at it with dark alarm. Whatever waited beneath that lower passage, he clearly feared it even more than the truth now rising behind him, and Kael knew the next step would take them even deeper into the secret heart. The white light still hung in the chamber like a fading wound in the air, and its glow made the stone floor shine as if it had just been cut open by the truth itself. Red Hollow was never a bright place, even at its best, because the city lived beneath layers of stone, iron, and silent fear. The arena above them had always looked like a place of contests and crowds, but the people who lived here knew better. The matches were not only for sport. They decided rank, food, safety, and who got to stand close to power. At the center of all that control stood Damien Vale, a middle-aged man with slick gray hair, pale skin, cold eyes, and a thin smile that never reached his heart. He wore black robes with silver trim like a judge who had never known mercy. Now he stared at the open passage in the floor, and for the first time, his confidence had cracked. Kael, a young fighter with short black hair, sharp gray eyes, a lean build, and worn dark leather on his body, stood near the broken edge with his blade ready and his breathing steady. He did not have the loud pride of a champion. He had the quiet focus of a man who had learned to survive by watching closely and striking at the right moment. Beside him, Lily, a teenage girl with long brown hair, bright worried eyes, and simple city clothes in muted blue and tan, held her cloak close with shaking hands. She had come this far because her brother was trapped in the system of Red Hollow, and every step deeper into the arena was another chance to bring him home. Owen, a young man with shaved blonde hair, a stocky frame, bruised knuckles, and faded fighter wraps, rose from the dust with a hard look and a tired jaw. He cared about pride, but he cared even more about not being used by Damien again. Mara, a woman with long red hair, a lean dancer-like body, and a black combat coat with ash-gray lining, moved with calm precision as she scanned the new opening. Victor, a tall man with white hair, a scarred jaw, and bone-forged armor that looked smooth and heavy, stood like a wall in human form, ready to protect the group if the next step became a trap. None of them trusted the silence below the floor, and that silence was the worst part, because Damien looked at it like a man facing a secret he had spent years burying. The white light had not opened the passage by accident. It had answered Kael when he refused to stop asking what the city was hiding, and now the truth had started to break. Damien took one slow step back, then stopped when he realized that everyone could see it. That tiny retreat mattered more than any speech could have mattered, because Damien Vale was the kind of man who never liked to look unsure. He had built Red Hollow on three things: fear, control, and the living ranking wall. That great wall of shifting light, stone, and metal lines had always rewritten the names and ranks of the city after every match, and the people had been trained to believe that the wall was fair because it was alive. But Kael had learned enough to know that a thing which rewrote power after every fight could also rewrite truths. He could feel it now in the chamber around them. Dark roots crawled through cracks in the lower stone. Glowing energy channels ran along the walls like veins under skin. Chained light flickered in the corners, held by silent mechanisms that seemed ready to bind anyone who came too close. And there were masked attendants, dressed in dark fitted uniforms with smooth masks that hid every face, standing in rigid rows near the passage like obedient shadows waiting for orders. Their chain lights glowed with linked bands of metal like energy, and each one had the shape of a tool designed to restrain without mercy. Damien finally spoke, but his voice was colder than before because fear had sharpened it. He said that none of them understood what they were about to wake. Kael answered with a steady voice that the city had already been waking, one lie at a time, and that was why they had come this far. Lily swallowed hard and looked at the masked attendants, then at Damien, and asked who they were really serving. Damien did not answer her directly. That silence told her enough. He was not merely hiding a secret chamber. He was hiding the system that fed the whole city. Owen clenched his fists and muttered that every match, every rank change, and every public humiliation had felt too neat to be random. Mara nodded once and said that the city had always moved like a machine. Victor said nothing, but his eyes shifted toward the roots below, as if he had seen something old there, something that should have stayed buried. Then Kael heard a low hum from the open passage. It was deep, steady, and alive, like a heartbeat under stone. Damien heard it too, and the small crack in his control widened into open alarm. He snapped at the masked attendants to close the passage, but they did not move at once, and that hesitation was another clue. They were not loyal to him out of respect. They were loyal because the chamber below had Kael moved first. He stepped toward the passage with his blade low and his eyes fixed on the dark stair that had appeared beneath the floor. Mara went with him, light on her feet, her calm face showing that she had already chosen her side. Victor placed one heavy hand on Owen and told him to guard Lily from the rear, because if the lower chamber turned hostile, the weakest point would be the open space behind them. Lily hated being told to stay back, but she also knew that her fear could not help her brother if she froze now, so she forced herself to breathe and kept her eyes open. Damien saw them move, and his thin smile returned for a second, but it looked forced, almost broken. He said that the chamber below was not for them and that they would regret every step. Kael told him that regret belonged to men who protected lies, and then he descended. The air below the floor was colder, denser, and full of a strange pressure that made every breath feel important. The stairway was cut from black stone and lined with old metal channels that glowed in thin lines, as if power had been flowing through them for years. At the bottom, the hidden chamber stretched wide and low, with dark roots hanging from the ceiling like tangled wires and glowing streams of energy moving through carved grooves in the walls. The place was beautiful in a hard and dangerous way, like a machine built to look sacred. In the center stood a large core frame wrapped in chain light, and around it waited more masked attendants, silent and still. Kael knew at once that this was the true heart of Red Hollow. The matches above were only a display. The ranks were only a mask. The city was being fed from below, and someone had been using the chamber to control who rose and who fell. Lily stared at the core frame and suddenly understood why her brother had never escaped the city. It was not only bad luck, it was design. The system had been built to keep people desperate.
Then the twist came, and it hit harder than any attack. One of the masked attendants stepped forward, and when the smooth mask lifted, the face beneath it was not a stranger. It was a man from the upper records, a trusted clerk who had worked beside the ranking boards for years. His voice was low and tired when he said that Damien had lied to everyone, but he had also lied to them. The chamber was not only a prison of control, it was the source of a binding ritual tied to
The hidden chamber trembled like a heart that had been forced to beat too long, and the broken light above it flashed across the black stone walls in hard white strips. Kael stood in the middle of it all, feet planted, shoulders set, and gray eyes fixed on Damien Vale as the arena master reached through the storm of shadow and light. Around them, masked attendants froze near the core frame, their chain lights humming and shaking in their hands, while the living ranking wall above the chamber flickered through broken names, broken numbers, and broken rules. Red Hollow was still the same city on the surface, but down here, deep under the arena floor, everyone could feel that one more mistake would bring the whole system down. Kael knew that was the real danger now. If Damien won, the city would stay locked inside fear, rank, and lies. If Damien fell too hard, the chamber might collapse and take the people below with it. That was why Kael had stopped fighting for his own place long ago. He was fighting for every person who had been trapped under that wall, every worker who had been used, and every fighter who had been taught that value only came from a number. The chamber beneath Red Hollow stayed still for one long breath, and that stillness felt heavier than stone. Dark roots curled around glowing channels in the floor, chain lights hummed in the hands of the masked attendants, and the core frame stood at the center like a machine built to hold a city in fear. Above them, the living ranking wall was changing for the first time in years, because the lie inside the system had finally begun to crack. Kael stood with his shoulders tense and his gray eyes fixed forward, knowing the truth was out now, but also knowing that truth alone would not save anyone. Lily, the brave teenage girl with long brown hair and worried eyes, pressed one hand to her mouth as relief and fear mixed together on her face. Owen, the stocky young fighter with shaved blonde hair and bruised knuckles, kept his feet planted beside her, ready to protect her if the chamber turned violent again. Harold Finch, the tired ranking clerk with short dark brown hair, held the proof in both hands like it might burn through him, and his whole body looked shaken by the weight of finally doing the right thing. Damien Vale, with his slick gray hair, cold eyes, and polished black robes, backed into the shadow near the core frame, and his thin smile had become sharp with panic. He wanted order because order kept him powerful, and if the city learned how he had used the ranking system, then the people of Red Hollow might stop fearing him. That was the real danger now, because a man who ruled through fear would always choose ruin before honesty. The hidden chamber felt colder now, with broken light crawling over black stone and the deep hum of the city shaking above them. Kael stood near the core frame, with Lily beside him, Owen and Mara close behind, Victor watching the shadows, and Harold Finch trembling in his gray worker clothes. Everyone there had a reason to fear Damien Vale, because Damien had turned Red Hollow into a machine that rewarded the strong, crushed the weak, and kept the truth buried under the arena floor. Harold took one shaky step forward and raised his hands. He was a ranking clerk who had spent years feeding names into the system, and now he wanted to make things right. He told them that Damien had not built the ranking wall for order alone. Damien had built it to steer fear, because frightened people stayed obedient, and obedient people never questioned who profited from their pain. Lily stared at him with bright, worried eyes, and then she looked at Kael, because her brother was the one Damien had used as a tool in the dark. Then the chamber began to move. The chain lights around the core frame flashed, and masked attendants rushed in from the black stone stairway, trying to seal the room before the secret could spread. Victor stepped forward like a wall of bone-forged armor, while Mara moved fast and clean, cutting through their control lines and forcing them back. Owen, tired but proud, dragged a fallen channel open with his bare hands, and Kael saw the truth at last. The living ranking wall was not only a display. It was a seal, and the seal was tied to the city power beneath Red Hollow. Damien returned through the dark above them, calm and smiling, because he thought fear would still win. He told Kael that the city needed a ruler, not a dreamer, and that people always begged for chains when freedom felt hard. But Kael had changed. He no longer fought just to survive one more match. He fought for Lily, for Harold, for Owen, for Mara, and for every person who had been ranked like property. When Kael struck the final control line, the wall above the arena broke open into public view, and the whole city saw the hidden system at once. Damien was driven back, the chamber seal collapsed, and Red Hollow finally woke up to the truth.